Hey folks, it's Chet from Tag Along with Chet, and it looks like we're going to be doing the next episode of the Hangar Chet-Chat. It's kind of crummy outside. It's snowing and it's minus 13 or 14 centigrade, so that's around 8 or 9 Fahrenheit, something to that effect. And yeah, I obviously can't go flying today because of the weather. Visibility out there is about 1.5 miles, so looks like we're under a bit of a snow warning, so we'll see what happens. At least today the temperature is not as bad as it was about half a week ago when we were in a real cold spell where the temperatures got down to around minus 30 centigrade with a wind chill factor of about minus 40, so it wasn't very pleasant. But anyway, a few days after that, the weather picked up nicely and it was nice and sunny. Roads were all good. So anyway, today is another one of these days. I guess February is going to be a bad month for us, so we'll just have to put up with it. Spring is just around the corner. Okay, let's get in the office and put this Hangar Chet-Chat together. See you in there. Okay, well, I'm nicely settled in the office now. I got the heat on. It's getting nice and warm in here. So let's just forget about the crummy weather outside and we'll continue on with the Hangar Chet-Chat. So today we're going to talk about the Canada Dry Antique Air Race, which took place on August the 5th, 1979. And it went from Delta Air Park, just south of Vancouver, to Toronto Island Airport. Now you got to remember, this was back in 1979, and none of the aircrafts had radio. None of them. We had a support aircraft, which I believe was a 172, and we used that for potential mechanicals where someone could whip out and pick up a part somewhere and help the stranded individual out. But that's the only aircraft that had a radio in it. I took off on August the 5th in my J3 Cub, leaving, oh, I can't remember, it was just around 8 o'clock. Now, I've got a recording. What I did is I bought a little recorder, a little cassette recorder from Radio Shack, which I took with me, and I documented the trip as I went. So you'll hear some stuff on there. I'll probably put it on this video. Probably won't put it all on because it gets quite lengthy. And it's just snippets. What I'll do is I'll take snippets of that and I'll insert it in this video. Anyway, I left Delta Air Park and went to Trail, BC, which was our first stop. Now, I made a fuel stop in Grand Forks, BC, prior to going on to Trail. And what I'll do is I'll just give you a little snippet of information on that trip where I documented it on my tape recorder, and I'll insert it in here.
Left this morning at approximately 5 minutes to 8. Actually, it was exactly 5 minutes to 8. And after having submitted my flight plan, and I estimated approximate time of about 4 hours to Trail, I climbed out of Vancouver, or Delta Air Park, and I climbed at a breathtaking speed of 50 to 65 or 55 to 65 miles an hour. And at from sea level at approximately 11 degrees centigrade, I managed to get to about 5,000 feet in about 20 minutes, which was quite good actually, considering I had a cruise prop on it. The new fuel gauge, which I'd just purchased for approximately $25, decided to indicate empty, so I wasn't quite sure whether or not I had a leaky fuel tank or what. I just more or less assumed that the float had sunk, and I still had a full tank in my reserve, so I wasn't really too worried. Things from there went quite smoothly actually. It ended up to be rather a real good trip.
Okay, what you heard there was the recording from my cassette, which I miraculously found, and I don't know how, but well, let's put it this way, I found it, and now you can listen to it, and that goes back to 1979. Anyway, on August the 6th, we left trail, and I made a few stops en route. I think I made a stop in a farmer's field somewhere and picked up some fuel there because I was running a little low. And then we went to Airdrie. And in Airdrie, I was probably one of the first ones in there, so I was asked by the people there whether or not I would do an interview on As It Happens. Anyway, they did an interview with me, and yeah, I'd never been doing that sort of stuff before on the radio, so I didn't know what to expect. So anyway, I'll put that clip in here as well. Again, not sure how much of it I'll put in because it goes on for a few minutes.
From coast to coast through the CBC radio network and around the world on shortwave, welcome affiliated stations to As It Happens.
Hello, I'm Michael Enright.
Good evening, I'm Alan Maitland. Tonight,
Flying ain't what it used to be, and 25 Canadian pilots are out to prove it. Air buffs across the country have taken off for an ancient aviator race.
storming their vintage flying machines in a week-long race from Vancouver to Toronto. Dressed in traditional garb, the aviators are operating from grass landing strips, doing all their own maintenance, and sleeping under their aircraft wings. Duplicating the flying methods of the 30s, the wingmen hope to recreate the thrills of the barrel-rolling era. Chet Eleveld has just finished the second day of the race. He's on the line from Airdrie, Alberta.
Mr. Eleveld, what sort of aircraft are you flying?
I'm flying a Piper Cub J3, built in 1941, and it was rebuilt in 1976.
I would hope so. The thing is well over 30 years old, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. It's beginning to feel like it.
What's the idea behind the race now? I mean, people who fly today fly in great big...
We're actually trying to do the thing that most people used to do in the early 20s there, and you know, get their old propeller airplane up there, you know, leaking with oil and whatnot, and just head across the country and see it all. It's been great so far.
Is have an open cockpit?
No, this one, about as close as you can get to it is by just opening up the doors, and you know, there are clamshell doors on it, and you just clip one underneath the wing, and then the bottom section of the door just falls alongside the fuselage, and that's about as open as I want to get. You know, you're pretty well out in the open then. The whole side of the airplane kind of disappears.
So you're not wearing the leather helmet and the goggles and the white silk scarf?
Well, no, not yet. I plan to do something like that maybe when we finish off the race, but it's been so warm that you start wearing all that paraphernalia, and you know, you just try to be as comfortable as you can.
What was it like going over the Rockies?
It was rough. I went from trail and then cut across just north of the Lizard Range, and then followed a whole bunch of hydro wires across into the valley that opens up into Pincher Creek. And it was rough there. I lost a couple of thousand feet in, I'd say about 5 minutes there, and I was kind of hanging on. The restrictions are it has to be a tailwheel airplane or tail skid. And then, of course, they have to be antique. They also cannot exceed 110 miles an hour in whatever the manufacturer specifications are. And they prefer landings on grass strips. They're trying to get away from the pavement type feeling, mainly going back to the 20s when there was very little paved field. And before you leave, you submit an estimated time that you feel that you'll be into the next checkpoint.
Now, you've got a lot of antique planes. Are there any antique pilots?
Yeah, there's a few old fellas, some retired chaps that are been flying for some years, and I guess they run into the 60s, maybe going into the 70s.
When do you expect to arrive in Toronto?
Toronto on Saturday. The last place that we land in and around the Toronto area is Toronto Island. We're, I believe, going to King City, and then from King City we end up going down the Don Valley Freeway and then past the CN Tower, and then land at Toronto Island Airport.
Well, good luck, Mr. Eleveld.
Okay, very nice talking with you. Bye.
The next day, which was August the 7th, we left from Airdrie. We dropped in at Brooks. The reason why we dropped in at Brooks is because one of the contestants that was, or participants in the air race was actually from Brooks. So the Brooks Flying Club put on a bit of a do for us out there, and then stopped in at Maple Creek. And then we ended up, it was Moose Jaw. It's a municipal airport, or the small airport anyway, in Moose Jaw. And that was something else. We even had an air show out there put on by the, I believe it was the Snowbirds. They came buzzing overhead a few times into some loops and whatnot. Then the next morning we left for Lindcrest, which is just on the northeast side of Winnipeg. And then we went from Lindcrest to, well, we were supposed to go to Land O'Lakes, which was in the States. I believe it's in Wisconsin. And that weather was just totally crummy. We stopped off at Pine Creek Airport, which is just a border crossing at the Manitoba, Minnesota border. And the Piney, the airport is right beside the road, and then the people that clear the cars on the road, they would also clear the airplanes, and it's still there. I've used it a few times when I go to Oshkosh, so it's a very convenient border crossing. We had to stop there, of course, for customs clearance. So we got into the States, and then the weather just went totally zonk. I mean, it was really, I've been in some bad weather, but this was really bad. It was foggy, drizzly, very restricted visibilities, and we had to get to Land O'Lakes because they were putting on a big do for us in Land O'Lakes, and it turns out that yeah, it never happened because nobody got there. And we all stayed overnight in a hotel. There, had a good time, had a few beer, and some of the guys ended up, I believe they ended up on an Air Force base, and which was restricted. But they were put up overnight there, and after they were met by jeeps, apparently from the Air Force when they landed. Nobody had a radio. Just remember, nobody had a radio. So I mean, we were landing at airports, you know, without a radio, and you know that. Well, you just don't do that these days. But in those days, I guess it was more acceptable than it is now. And anyway, I know some of the guys. I think two of them ended up at this Air Force base, and they were totally lost. They didn't know where they were. And anyway, they were put up in the bunks out there in the barracks. They had a good time out there. You know, they ended up eating at the mess hall and so forth, so they did well. Anyway, the next day we left, and we went from Eveleth to Collingwood. Now, mind you, we had to clear customs again back into Canada, so we stopped off. I stopped off a few times in Ashland, Manistee, and then everybody had to stop in Gore Bay for customs clearance. And then from there on, we went into Collingwood. And in Collingwood, I'll put another little snippet in here, was we actually made the news on that one as well. Now, we made the news in every place out here. I mean, we were sponsored by Canada Dry, and we even had a representative flying with us on this trip who was part of the PR.
Continues in Collingwood tonight, and Chris Russell has the details.
14 aircraft in the Canada Dry Antique Aircraft Race have landed at Collingwood Airport tonight. This is the last stop in the race before they head to the finish line at the Toronto Island Airport tomorrow. The planes left Vancouver last Saturday and have been making nightly stops along the way. Overcast skies and rain have hampered the progress of a few planes, as two are staying in Owen Sound. Wyerton, Lions Head, and Gore Bay are overnight stops for 3 other planes. One of the oldest antique aircraft in the race was built 38 years ago. At this hour, the pilots in Collingwood are enjoying a hot meal before retiring for the night in tents beside their planes. The aircraft will remain at the Collingwood Airport until 11 tomorrow morning.
In Collingwood, the next day, that would have been August the 11th now, we went from Collingwood and we stopped in a little airport which is right alongside Highway 400 North. It's no longer there. They used to have helicopters there. There's a little grass strip.
Well, it's about 20 minutes after 11, and I'm just hovering around here. Just slowed down a little bit. I'm just northeast of King City right now, and my estimate is for 10:30. So if the watches and everything are correct around here, then I might just make this one right on, but I'll usually be a couple of minutes out depending what kind of traffic I've got to put up with. 10 minutes left, so I think I'll head back into the circuit and see how it goes. This is the last official leg of the air race, and after this we'll head off towards Toronto Island, where we'll all get together and meet the press, I gather, like we have in most airports. We're stopping off at King City Airport just mainly for food and maybe to fuel up a little bit if we need it. And that'll be the end of the race. We'll be staying overnight in the Chelsea Inn, and after that it's westward bound, depending how the old airplane holds out for its next inspection, which I'll have done here in Burlington Air Park. We'll chat with you possibly a little later on. I have to get back to flying this thing. I've got it flying around 50 miles an hour now, and I'm trying to maintain altitude as well. I wanted to keep the noise level down a little bit because it normally doesn't work when you've got 2100 RPM on. So I'll chat with you a bit later on then.
And I remember it there from the 70s. I used to go in there quite a bit. When I had the airplane in Burlington Air Park, when I was based out of Toronto, and it was called King City, and we stopped there, and the reason why we stopped there was to get everyone together, because now we were going to do this big formation flight, or inline flight you might say, to Toronto Island Airport. Now you got to remember, Toronto Island Airport was controlled. We were going through Toronto airspace, so that's Toronto International Airspace. And we basically had to follow a set procedure. And the whole thing is we were going down the Don Valley Parkway, I guess it was. And then from there, we were supposed to be doing a loop around the CN Tower. And then from there, we were supposed to land at Toronto Island Airport, one at a time. Well, as it so happened, we were instructed to follow the aircraft in front of us. The lead aircraft was the 172, the Cessna 172, which had a radio, and then everybody was kind of placed in line, and there was a line of 23 airplanes going down the Don Valley Expressway there, going down, and then we were supposed to go around the CN Tower. Now in the CN Tower, there was a guy from, I don't know if it was a radio station or a television station, I can't recall. He was supposed to be up top of this CN Tower, or just outside, I guess, where that observation platform is, with a huge checkered flag. And as we were coming by, he was supposed to go, you know. Well, unfortunately, for some reason, I didn't know this, that there was some guy up there. Whether I'd missed it in the briefing or whatnot, but in any case, it didn't matter. The Cessna 172 landed. I couldn't see it. I was about number 3 or 4 in line. Anyway, all of a sudden, the airplane in front of me, which was another little Piper Cub in front of me, he kept on going right past the CN Tower. And I'll put a little clip in here, the picture of the CN Tower as we were going by. Mind you, folks, these aren't the best pictures, because you got to remember in those days, pictures aren't like you take your little cell phone out, take a nice little shot of it with a super duper lens in it. But I didn't have that. But anyway, I'll put a picture in it. And instead of going around the CN Tower, we just went right by it, because I was following the airplane in front of him, and he was following the airplane in front of him, and so on and so on. Well, it seems that just behind the Cessna 172, there was a Tiger Moth flown by a guy out of Vancouver, Richard something. Anyway, Richard ended up with an oil problem, where his temperature went whoop, and his oil temperature went, or his pressure went down, and he was losing oil, and he had to land. Well, so the guy behind him thought, well, I have to follow that airplane. He didn't know there was something wrong with the guy in the Tiger Moth, so he just followed him. So Richard went in, and he just, you know, looped around and landed on the main runway out there. And the guy behind him just followed him and did the same thing, and the guy in front of or behind him did the same thing, and I did the same thing. So basically all of us just went zoom, zoom, you know, just everybody followed each other. Well, there was a little bit of a discussion going on with the guys that put all this together. They apparently weren't too happy about that in the control tower, because there's 23 airplanes landing. It's a controlled airport, and we were just coming in one right after another. So I don't know, they probably had to close the airport or something for that event, because to get all those airplanes in there must have taken a good half hour. So I don't know if there was scheduled runs in there at that day. Those days, I don't think there were. But in any case, I know there was a little bit of Transport Canada issues that came out of this.
I have a telegram here. MOT, yeah, DOT. Light there. Turn off the lights. Here we are. It's from Otto Lang. It reads, congratulations. If you bastards had tried that while I was Minister of Transport, you'd all be in jail.
And they were all kind of wiped under the table because the organizers had a chat, and anyway, everything was tickety-boo. So anyway, there we went, and we got to Toronto Island Airport. The press at Toronto Island Airport was pretty overwhelming. We had everybody there. All the local TV stations were there. The newspapers were all there. So it was quite an event. Now we got into Toronto Island Airport on the 11th. And then that night, we were all put up in the Chelsea Inn in Toronto downtown, which was actually quite good. That was a nice hotel. It was, I don't know how many floors it was, 20, 30 floors, I don't know, but it was quite a nice hotel right downtown. And then after that, that evening, we went to some, I can't remember what the name of the restaurant was. It was a huge place, and it was all reserved for us. And they had the president of Canada Dry there, and some of the other folks from Canada Dry, and they gave out the prizes. Now I did not win. Okay, I think I had something like 10 or 15 points against me, and the way that kind of went is if you every minute you were either early or ahead of your estimated time of arrival on a flight plan that you submitted to them prior to departing from each leg. You know, you either had to make it right on. If you made it right on, you got 0, and if you were a minute early, you got -1, and if you were a minute ahead, you were minus, or you got points. So all these points counted against you. Anyway, one of the guys, and I can't remember who it was that won. Oh, it was a guy him and his wife, and he had his son with him. A little Rob, I think his name was, the little kid, and and of course they deserved it because they did a real good job. And I got dressed up. They wanted us to get kind of dressed up at the end, and I took an old uniform I had. I had an old Canadian Pacific Airlines jacket. I had the cap still. And I took the emblem off, and I put an old prop up there or something, or I can't remember. I had a prop over here instead of wings, and it was kind of falling off. And I had a pair of old long underwear on instead of the uniform pants. Anyway, it made the press. I know some of the magazines where it was in, but I don't have those anymore. A lot of the stuff that I had, folks, I had lost in the flood in High River when we lived in High River. I had all my documents and all my airline memorabilia. I had that downstairs in a memorabilia box. It was a huge box. It had all types of stuff in it from the airlines and my flying days and so forth. And it all went downstream. It all got wiped out in the flood. along with thousands of other items that we lost. But anyway, that's another, we'll go into that. That was 2013. It was a memorable year for us, 2013. But anyway, and that's the end of it. That's we did that, and then of course I took the air. Since I was familiar with Burlington or that whole area down in southern Ontario, because I used to be, I lived in Burlington, Ontario, and quite a few of the little towns in around there, and I worked out of Toronto International Airport, so and downtown Toronto. So I was quite familiar with the area. I had lots of connection out there. I still had family there, so I took the airplane and I flew it to Burlington Air Park. And in Burlington Air Park, had the airplane gone over by one of the maintenance guys out there, so that I could take the aircraft back to Delta.